Nominations?
Remain the same with Gary Duncan.
Second? Any other nominations? Any other volunteers? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, secretary, do we really do a secretary? I mean,
We're just gonna keep calling it secretary.
Right.
In the past, we've had like that named person would be the third place person if some of the two of you weren't present.
okay. Okay, we need a named secretary. Is there nominations? Well, do it.
We need to pick somebody there.
Nominate Austin Kaiser.
Any others? Or is there a second? Actually, wait a minute. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other nominations? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's only name only. Okay? Okay. Okay, we need approval for the minutes of April 27th, 2020. Has everyone had a chance to read those? Is there a second?
Second.
There were two, pick your, take your pick.
Are your mics on over there on the sides? I'm sorry. I know, I'm sorry, we don't have very good setup here on those. Yeah, good.
Okay. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as written?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are accepted. Okay, the first. Now, Carla, aren't the maps for these two, for number one and number two, weren't they switched?
The
Well,
attachments for the properties.
Yeah, weren't they switched? Because I was going through it and I thought, and then I came to the second one. You got the same thing?
I thought the same.
Yeah. Okay, well, I just wanted to clarify that, I thought they were switched. Okay. The first item, a notice of a public hearing for a site plan review submitted by MoMed Mobility LLC for proposed medical marijuana dispensary at 106 North Clark Street. This location is currently zoned B2 Downtown District. Is it? Okay?
I'll say Aaron has went through and done a nice job of kind of putting together cliff notes together up here on the board, so for the P and Z issues, and it'll have some diagrams up there, so that'll be for reference.
Okay, is
Maybe.
there anyone here to speak for this issue? If you come to the microphone, or the microphone's not there.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, they have the diagrams, so you're right, it is Clark Street, so they had the addresses reversed, it's MoMed, so you are actually, they just got your address on your name, so,
Let's see.
yes,
That's the LLC. Is that what you guys have?
yes. So that's the first item, so
Okay, so the addresses on 1 and 2 should be switched?
It's just the drawing was wrong.
the diagrams are just, the diagram's the only thing that's wrong, the diagram's the only thing that's wrong.
The diagram that we have? Okay. Right, the maps need to be switched.
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's what we just,
I'm sorry,
I thought
so-
we determined that already.
So you are number one. So if you want to, like, give just a little talk about, a brief discussion of your property to them, or your site plan.
Is the microphone, Tom, she doesn't have a
I have it,
microphone?
I'll put it up there.
Okay.
We have only got so many.
Okay.
Hey there, my name is Sean. I'm COO of our company.
Just a little bit about our business. Pre-existing location was used for retail. Dispensary is also a retail business. We're selling medical marijuana. We've tried to include everything as requested by the city. You can see a proposed rendering of how we intend to improve the property. Our intention is to paint the brick a dark charcoal color, modify the existing overhang or awning in the front of the building. You know, visually, that's really all that's changing to the exterior. The brick application is deemed important by our contractor. The brick's in pretty foul condition. There's an existing green metal siding portion that's close to the mural. That green siding will be replaced with a black metal siding, same type, different color. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. If there's business type questions or anything about the operation, I'm happy to answer that, but most of that's covered in DHSS legislation, so I don't know what else you'd like to know.
How many people do you plan to employ?
Total plan to employ at this location is somewhere between 4 and 6 full-time. Some of that will be shift labor, so it could flex up to 10 plus, depending.
When you say this location, do you have other locations?
We do. So our company as a whole in Missouri, we applied for 8 total cannabis-based licenses. We were awarded 4. So 3 of those are retail, 1 in Moberly, 1 in Hannibal, and 1 in Chillicothe. And our manufacturing location is in Clarence, Missouri.
Are the others already operating?
No, no ma'am. Everything's currently in a construction phase. So us as a company, DHSS goes through what they call a verification process. So we've just completed that, in which case they review our company. Our application for the license type goes under a formal review. They look at our ownership structure. So we've recently gotten those approvals. So at this point in the process, the state has all of our information, all of our plans, everything's been approved. And for us right now, it's just a matter of getting through the municipal process, finishing our construction process. We request what's called a commencement inspection. And within 30 days of us requesting that commencement inspection, DHSS sends out a representative. They walk our facility. They look at what our facility in actuality looks like compared to what we told them it was going to look like. So everything from our layout to our security systems and camera layouts, all the details that DHSS is looking for. They basically do an audit, and they either approve us or disapprove us at that time. And when we do get past our commencement inspection, that's when DHSS gives us the right to open our business to sell medical marijuana.
What will be your hours of business?
This location is that
Well, that's kind of up in the air, but we'll run typically like a pharmacy would, so depending on demand, I would anticipate somewhere around a 10 a.m. to a 7 p.m. That's basically pretty much what it'll be. Whether or not we're gonna be open on Sundays, we're still kind of debating. If we are open on Sundays, it'll be after church, like at noon to 1 to maybe 6 o'clock.
we
Are
typically,
you going to offer home delivery for the product?
we do plan on offering it, yes.
And that follows all the DHSS guidelines, so there's really strict regulations on how that'll work. And quite honestly, DHSS is still working those out because anyone who's purchasing medical marijuana has to have a patient certification, a patient ID card, and how they can pay for that product. So DHSS is still working out those details.
So the city of Moberly established certain places where you guys could have business like this. Is it safe to assume that you work with the city of Moberly to establish, hey, this place conforms to all those locations, all those requirements? Is that fair to assume?
Yes, sir. Who gave us written approval prior to the
We
application
actually been working
process?
with Tom in the city of Moberly even prior to application, and actually Tom Kitten, we were probably the first to come to the city of Moberly, and essentially we were willing to go wherever you guys wanted us within the city, and then you established that it needed to be in the downtown area, which we're thrilled about. But even to get a license, you guys need to be reassured, whether it's us or the other dispensaries in town,
Sure.
So everyone's gonna comply, and I can feel, I'm speaking on behalf of our competition, that they are too. I mean, this is the most regulated industry, maybe gaming might be more, but, that I've ever been a part of, and I work in retail grocery, which has its fair share of
Sure.
regulations as well. So, you can rest assured about everyone following the rules. We're gonna do what the city wants us to do, and we're certainly gonna do what DHSS wants us to do.
And to speak to that point a little bit, myself and Brooke Foster, we're both on MoCan Trade Advisory Board Committee positions. So that's the third-party advisory board that provides experience to DHSS to help guide them on certain topics. I personally have been an owner-operator in 2 other states. I've been in the industry for about 7 years. So we're certainly bringing a level of experience and expertise to the process. So this isn't our first rodeo, and we're certainly going to be operating at a very compliant and safe way.
What are the other states?
Colorado and Oregon. Very, very heavily regulated. Missouri's done a very good job. DHSS has done a good job. They've kind of cherry-picked the best rules from different states, and for better or for worse, from some people's point of view, Missouri's an extremely regulated state in terms of the products and processes that we have to follow. We're very experienced with that, and patients will benefit from that.
Tom, this question maybe should have been maybe asked to you before we ever started this. Has the city decided how many of these they can have, or,
State decides that,
oh,
so we have allowed them in the B2 district only, so they're exclusive in that. We anticipated, based on what we were hearing, based on the regulations, 1 per 30,000 population, something like that.
They issued 192 statewide, and it was distributed evenly across congressional districts. So there was a certain amount allotted per congressional district. Where within that district was not regulated. So certain cities ended up with more than 1, some ended up with 4, a lot ended up with 0. They did not discriminate based on the municipality of where they're at, as long as they fell within the congressional district.
so how many did our,
Ranking, we end up getting 3, and 2 of them are gonna move forward with it. Because 2 of the ones actually were gonna be side by side with each other, and so one of those withdrew, so we will only have 2.
so, okay.
May I have the floor, please? First of all, I greatly appreciate if you never use the word pharmacy in conjunction with your business. No, I'm damn serious. I'm a pharmacist, and I don't like to do that. Okay, we have a completely different operation, and it's different. We don't, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Can you explain to me why many of you got 4 or 5, some companies have 12 licenses, and all that is being challenged now in the courts, because there does not seem to be valid reasons except those who donate a lot of money to the state. So that is in the courts now. What would happen if all these licenses have been pulled out and the whole process started again, because that may occur? And the second reasons why all these licenses may be pulled out is of the 192 licenses that have been granted, there was not one license granted to people of color. Do you have, I'm sorry? There were no licenses granted to people of color, black people. And for all the 92, well, I don't think, well, if you have any information regarding that,
I do not have any information regarding any of that. The people that scored they were applying for, and I can assure you, every application was anonymous. We did not put our names in there. We weren't even allowed to put the address 106 North Clark. The only thing we could put was we were applying in Logan. Nobody's names, everything was initials. It was all an anonymous process, and the scoring company was from Nevada. So, as the applications were turned in, it was just the top applications got it. So, I can't speak to why somebody didn't get it.
I'll speak to that a little bit as well. So as far as the whole program itself, and again, I'm not an attorney, but Amendment 2, which is a constitutional amendment in Missouri, they spelled out minimum requirements for the industry within that amendment. And as far as I understand it, it's 192 at a minimum, meaning not a maximum, but at a minimum, the state must grant 192 dispensaries, 86 manufacturing or infused product licenses, 60 cultivations, and at the time initially it was 8, but they changed it to 10 testing companies. So those are minimums that are set forth in the Constitution, which I guess as I understand how the Constitution works, that can't change. Now they can, and the Department of Human Health, Senior Services reserves the right to increase those numbers, which I believe you're correct in terms of the appeals. There may be more issued. I find it, I don't think it could possibly eliminate all. Now I think depending on how lawsuits go, and there's plenty of those, it's possible that they might review the scoring and reassess allocation. But because they've already moved forward with verification and approved people's right to construct, so I don't believe in any scenario they would have the legal ability to strip licenses away from folks that have been issued. Now I will say in terms of the multiple licenses awarded to individual groups like ourselves, as Brooke indicated, it is a blind scoring. The applications are fully redacted. No personal identifying information, including your race, was made known to the graders. And then there was a maximum set forth within the regulations to the number of licenses a single group could obtain. So you were allowed to potentially be awarded 3 manufacturing licenses, 3 cultivation licenses, and 5 retail. That's the maximum. They also said you could not own a testing company and own any of the other types, meaning there's a conflict of interest if you're involved in producing and testing. So you had to choose if you wanted to be a tester, you couldn't be anything else, and vice versa. So they've relooked at that after the fact, and manufacturing part of the business, that's the extraction, turning it into a pill or a food or whatever. They've judged that there's no need for an individual company to hold more than one of those because there's no production or extraction limitations like they said on the cultivation businesses. So a cultivation is only allowed to produce up to 30,000 square feet of what they call mature canopy or marijuana producing plants.
I'm familiar with all these things
Okay.
you're talking about. My concern is, what I'm interested in to find out is that the former representative Tilley, who was a lobbyist, managed to, at least that's what the lawsuit alleges, is that the more you donated to Governor Parsons, improved your chances of getting.
I'm familiar with that
these
suit.
license- Well, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
We, not our representative, and we're proud to not donate any money to that.
I understand, I'm not talking about you personally, I'm telling you what the lawsuit is all about.
No, we're aware of that. But I don't think you have to worry about that with the people that want to.
Well, whatever happens, if the lawsuit is successful, there may be a chance that a lot of these licenses will be recalled, because that was part of the lawsuit. What would you do if all these things, do you have any contingency plans about what you would do if those licenses have been withdrawn? and
With the
starting
property,
over?
if our license is revoked?
It's not revoked, recalled, and then the new process starts all over again. Because the black community, please, the black community is really up in arms on their idea that not one black person or entity received any licenses to operate in any parts of the state. And I think that is a very strong argument on that. I'm just concerned now, whatever happens, what's going to happen to the facilities that we are discussing here, including yours? If that happens, do you have any contingency plans?
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
That would be like something that they would have, that's
I have another question for you, Tom, since you took over to, to express your opinions. Is there any reason why he has to submit a plan, a site review plan for a building that's been here for a long time? We don't do that with other businesses when they come in from an empty building or buy a building with a different type of thing. I'm sorry?
The first item in there is talks about, respecting I gave Austin a copy of it before the meeting. But, check all that for a second.
Well, you can just,
I can't-
you can just read it for everybody to understand.
Basically, it's just balancing the landowner's rights and the users of their land with corresponding rights of abutting the neighbor's landowners to live with undue disturbance, noise, smoke, fumes, dust, odor, glare, and so there was some of the comments we heard from other communities was potential for odor, so that was one of the things we wanted to review, and so that was the first item under site plan. So that's why these have come under site plans more than others. But any change of use of a business is technically eligible for a site plan review.
Is that part of our city ordinances?
Yes, sir. Zoning
Okay.
regulations.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, appreciate it. Ma'am, thanks. Don't you ever use the word pharmacy with your business, please. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Carla, please note that Mr. Jeffries has arrived. Mr. Jeffries has arrived? Yes. Okay.
Madam Chair, I make a motion, we approve item number 1.
I second it.
Any other discussion? We didn't ever ask for if there were any questions or comments from the audience. Did anyone in the audience want to speak to this issue? Okay, no other discussion then? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Thank you very much.
who's Rich? Oh, I can't understand that. Okay, number 2 is a notice of public hearing for a site plan review submitted by GRD Mobley LLC for a proposed medical marijuana dispensary at 412 West Coat Street. This location is currently zoned B2H, Central Business Historical Downtown District. Is there anyone here to speak to this? Would you come to the mic, please?
My name is Jay Patel, and I represent GRD Mobley LLC.
Okay, what does that stand for, that G?
GRD, Green
Yeah.
Relief Dispensary.
Say that again?
Green Relief
Oh,
Dispensary.
okay, okay. That makes sense, that's what it says on the building. Okay. Are there any questions for him?
I assume it's safe. Yeah.
Same thing as the question somebody asked about zoning, permitted use, clearance from the schools, so that's what Karen is kind of highlighting. I apologize if all of you having a hard time seeing that, but it kind of goes through, all major issues that we reviewed, and they were approved on both of them. I should have pointed that out better when we started, I'm sorry.
How many employees do you plan to employ?
Well, depends on the demand and the volume, but we plan on starting on site, at a given time, probably 4 employees at a given time, and then again, it just like any business is
Right.
supply and demand.
And your
That's
hours?
at any given time. That means total employees will be more.
And your hours?
We expect to, and we haven't heard anything from the city, but we expect to be open from 9 o'clock to 7 p.m. And that, again, we're open to local regulations if there is any. State does not regulate that. Well, they do from, I think, 6 a.m. to midnight, I believe they do. But as long as we're open 40 hours a week, they're happy with it.
Any more questions for him?
Mr. Patel,
As-
how many licenses did you receive?
4.
Where are they located?
We have one in Moberly, one in Mexico, one in Troy, and one in Colombia.
Thank you.
No, well, they are all under construction at the moment. Yeah, I mean, it's too soon to be operating because there's no products available. There's no testing lab has gone through commencing yet.
When do you expect to start then?
Building will be ready much sooner than that, but we expect to open our doors probably September. Soft opening, consult with patients, have open house, invite all of you guys, get some feedback, learn of our facility. And then when THC product does arrive in October, we would be ready for it. We would be ready before the product shows up, but,
But the product isn't going to be ready until October.
Right. So the three facility that did get the commencing so far, I believe they started 2-3 weeks ago. So we're expecting the harvest and testing in October sometime.
Does the state have pricing regulations on the products that you will retail, or is it just a fair market value?
It's fair market value, just market dictates that.
Madam Chair, I make a motion we approve number 2.
I second it. Oh, Florida can second that one.
Any other discussion, any discussion from the audience, any comments from the audience? We seem to be leaving them out.
I
Yes.
do want to bring something up. When I was talking to Aaron, he had mentioned that the downtown district restricts the signage on each window pane to be 25%. And according to DHSS regulation, we cannot have any public visibility into the space. So 90% of our windows are directly visible into our dispensary or behind the receptionist, which is, sort of HIPAA violation. So what we had requested is if we can cover those windows. Of course, we'll have to cover them inside, but just to make it look good and for the branding, if the city would allow us to extend the 25% to just full normal coverage, and we would give city a mock-up of what we like to do, and actually have it on my flash drive if someone wants to put it up to see what we're talking about to the best of what I could.
I mean, that would be the historic committee they'd go through for that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's no problem. You'll just have to, I believe, go through the historic committee and get the approval there.
We did have a discussion, we will have to go through historic preservation approval, but we'll also have to meet our city code regulations to sign. And if there's any deviation from that, if there are any options, we'll look at them at the time. I have not received any storage diagram yet as to what he is discussing, so we'll look at that one next week.
I would suggest keep working with Aaron, and we'll take it through the historic committee and go from
Okay.
there. So, but we'll help make sure that you conform to the state guidelines. So.
Well, we have a motion on the floor and it has been seconded. Anything else before we vote? If not, how many are in favor? All right, those in favor, say aye. And those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. I hope you all had a chance to read all of the volume of material we had on number 3, and that you understood it all. Number 3 is a notice of a public hearing for a request submitted by the City of Moberly for a text amendment to define and clarify zoning regulations for temporary living shelters in the B3 and M1 districts. And Tom, you're going to talk to us, okay?
Laptop. So, as you know, right now, we currently don't have a district or an ability to provide for temporary living shelters or whether that be warming or homeless. So what we had to try to do is work off of if we don't have that, we try to get to the next closest thing we have to that. And we have it called transitional living facility, which we would allow that as a close second to be in a B3 and an M1, but they have setbacks of I think it's 1,500 feet from each other. I think that's 15 on that one. And then there's 300 feet from schools and churches. So I know one of the things they're looking at is church facilities, so that really doesn't fit the bill. So right now, we don't have an easy mechanism to make it work right now. So we've been looking at a lot of locations in other communities, and we've also worked with a third-party consultant with Bartlett and West, our planning and zoning consultant, and come up with some plans on this. And we had it ready a while back, but we've held off since the COVID issue, but time to bring it forward. So as you know, on these issues, there's people who are very strongly on one side of this and one's very strongly on the other. So we've tried to find a nice meet in the middle that would allow something that's reasonable and what we've seen in other communities. And that's, Aaron has put together like a little slideshow here, or not PowerPoint, I guess, to run through there. Next thing. All right. So the recommended codes are conditional use in a B3 and an M1 zoning district, which is the same as a transitional use as it is right now. And they would have required to meet certain use standards. So, but it doesn't have the setbacks. The only setback limitation would be 500 feet from another facility, but it wouldn't have that setback from the schools and the churches, so that would make a lot more locations eligible. Then definition of a temporary living shelters. This includes overnight accommodations for those without a residence or otherwise in need, specific application to warming shelters and homeless shelters. Also proposing a time limitation and temperature limits for operation of a warming shelter, November 1st to April 30th, and temperatures below 32 degrees overnight. So that's, again, these aren't things that we've made up, that's things that we've worked with the consultants and looked at other communities to develop this. Time limit of operation for a homeless shelter, year-round occupancy, maximum use of 30 days and 6 months. Let's see. And that's it. Temporary living for shelters continued, recommended codes. It would be our local building, adopted building codes would apply. A limitation on density, what we mentioned, the 500 feet from other temporary living facilities. A submission of a management and operational plans required. I mean, there's a lot to these and what we found with our communities to have, planning is not just open the door and hope for the best. And so, and also once a year presentation to city council, of city personnel, ability of space and buildings. So there's a lot more to these sheets as you've gathered, and so I've kind of touched on the highlights. But what we're at with this, it would provide us a start where the warming shelters would have locations that are viable in town right now with this regulation, and also there would be some guidelines in place where a homeless shelter could be established if desired. I know again, this is a middle ground. I know there are opinions both ways on this, so.
I have a couple of questions. When I hear warming center versus a shelter, so to speak, for homeless shelter, to me, a warming center, how do you define temporary living accommodations? Because I look at like this room here. If the city council decided, hey, if the mayor decided one night, it's -5 degrees, we're going to open up City Hall, allow anybody to come in here and stay warm, how does that differ than what this is asking for?
The warming shelter would be the same, guidelines as far as it includes overnight accommodations, and it could be like overnight and you're out the next day, that's warming shelter.
Okay.
But it still falls under transitional living facilities because it's somewhere, assuming that you don't have a place to stay for the night, or you don't have a place to stay for a week or a month or whatever. It's a transitional living facility, so it falls under that definition. But again, warming shelter, obviously overnight, it's not going to have the same extent of accommodations as a homeless shelter.
Right. But yet, what I see here is warming shelters, homeless shelters, all point to the definitions under temporary living shelter facilities. So
Yes.
they're kind of crammed together into one.
You still have to have you have a lot of the same issues
Okay.
under both of them. So that's, as far as accommodating, we have a brief taste of it with the temporary homeless shelter that was established or warming shelter that was initially created over on Logan Street. So separation of sexes, separation of families, showering facilities, restroom facilities, building codes. So
So what if they don't have shower facilities?
for the overnight shelters, I don't think that's required, but, so each one of the warming shelter or a homeless shelter has different design standards and guidelines.
And where I'm going is, my, number one, I'm hesitant to have us regulate what a church can and can't do within their building to a certain extent. Sitting here, and like the point I made with the mayor saying, hey, let's open up the city hall and let anybody sit these chairs overnight until the next morning, I don't see how that compares to a homeless shelter where we're providing living accommodations.
You're still bringing people in that are not one family, so you have mixed use, and so you're making living accommodations, whether it be for one night or for others. So you have issues there where you have to deal with separation of families, separation of sexes, separation, you don't want to, there's a lot that could go bad in that situation if you don't have that divided up in restroom facilities. And so it needs to be equipped for an overnight. Bringing a church operation in for a business meeting, for a prayer session, for a revival, whatever, they're there, they leave, but it's not overnight. When you're sleeping overnight, restrooms, showers, or whatever, if there are any, carrying food, there's just a lot of things to deal with that are in a different category than having any type of meeting there. So we don't regulate the meetings, but when you start having overnight stays, that becomes a zoning issue that has to be dealt with on a different level.
So what is the difference between a church having a lock-in for a youth group where a bunch of youth come overnight and stay the night versus opening their doors so that a family with small children that have no utilities have a place to come and stay warm as opposed to staying at home in a house with no utilities?
Typically, you're going to have youth of the same age, and so, I wouldn't say it's a lot different, but you're going to have supervisors who are dealing with that. Maybe a lot of times are members of that church that are knowing each other, and they're, a different environment where is a living facility, you're bringing people that never met, different places, different issues going on in their lives, and so I think it's, and I'm not speculating, but I'm saying based on what other communities have talked to us about, there's, in some cases you have, whether it be chemical abuse or substance abuse that are going on in those locations, so you have a lot of different factors you're bringing in that wouldn't be standard or typical of what you might see in a lock-in. So I don't think you could reasonably expect to compare those two.
Anybody else have any questions?
Other questions? Sam?
I have a problem with, this is on page 24 of 28. I have a problem with having operation for 7 months with 1 calendar year. I think and the reason I bring that up because we've had the problem before on homeless shelter, and we all remember what we went through with that church. Are we opening up the door for homeless shelters without whoever wants to establish it to bring it to the planning and zoning with their presentation so we can understand what the operation is going to be like? Having 7 months out of the year.
I think you're looking at the old version. If you look at the red line in the latest revision, it shows from November 1st to April 30th. It's in red line, I'm sorry, on page 26 to 29, so there's a...
Well, I still think that's too long of a thing for, why don't we just limit it to the cold weather? Let's say from November, okay, I guess that's all right with me. Now, on the other, I'm still reading the old one, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to read the new one.
Sure.
Send that, but there are no references to what I think should be included in these definition as to if you're gonna have somebody staying in the building overnight or for 7 or 8, I think that we should specify that they should have smoke alarms, they should have fire exits, and they should have fire extinguishers, that sort of thing, safety.
And that's part of what it says, it has to be compliant with our regulations on them. So they would have to submit a plan, a management plan, and it would have, and we'd have, they still meet all of our guidelines as far as building regulations, and so the smoke alarms and all that kind of thing would be part of what our requirements are.
Based on what we have over here, as far as the churches are concerned, there's only one church that could qualify for all this. Is that right? That's what I understood.
There's only one church in the immediate downtown. There are other churches in the community that would also comply, but as far as when we were initially asked about a few churches that were named in the downtown area, there's only the one over there on Morley Street is the only one in the immediate downtown area proximity. There are other churches within the city that would comply.
So if that church decides to have a homeless shelter within the building, they can just go ahead and do it without bringing it to the city council or the planning and zoning?
No, it's a conditional use in every circumstance. So everyone, there's no automatic. So each one would have to come and have a management plan, present to us. Planning and zoning would go before a conditional use and look at the circumstances. So
Is it really necessary for us to regulate what the churches can do? They just leave it to whatever they want to do.
I mean, that's a question that you all have to decide, but I mean, right now, based on what most communities have, if you have overnight stays of warming shelters or homeless shelters, then you can get into they have requirements where they have to go through this. We're not setting the bar or reinventing the wheel here. This is I mean, we're trying to follow guidelines of what other communities have experienced and how they've dealt with it, and so we're not putting in something new to us, but not new to the planning and zoning world. It's when you have an overnight stay. I'll give you an example. I mean, Columbia, I think it was the first night they opened. I was talking to, it was in the old Wabash Depot. They had a warming shelter in there, and they had strict regulations on no alcohol and no drugs use policy. And I think they had 15 people. I was told this by the attorney down there, that they had 15 people the first night, and by 2 o'clock in the morning, they were down to 2 because of the alcohol and drug issues that came in. So I know the church wants to deal with that, but I mean, you have to have some training because, I mean, you can have some problems out of that.
Thank you, Tom.
Anybody else? Anybody from the audience want to say? Yes. Would you come to the mic and state your name?
Yes, thank you. My name's Ted Sander. I am representing a group of organizations here within the county and the city, which are, I think, as much as anything behind the regulations that Tom has presented forth. We've been trying for 3 years to do something about getting a homeless shelter, not a homeless shelter, but a warming shelter established here, and we have eventually gotten to this point. And so we see this as real progress of having finally gotten to this point. The groups that I represent include the United Way of Randolph County, Randolph County Caring Communities, the Salvation Army, the Randolph County Ministerial Alliance, and the St. Vincent de Paul Society of St. Pius Church. So, you know, we are very sensitive to what happened here several years ago when a homeless shelter was first formed, and there were all kinds of problems. And it is our intention that that will not happen. And so I really think that with having the group of organizations that we've got behind this, that we're approaching it from, not from a standpoint of, hey, there's a need, let's just go do this. We're going to put together a plan that covers all the things that Tom has talked about. I got a copy of the proposed regulations that you're putting up tonight, and I've had those since, I think, sometime in March, and I've had a chance to go through them pretty thoroughly. And for the most part, although we see that it's a lot of regulations that are being put on us, most of them are reasonable. They're things that we need to be addressing and we need to be taking care of if we're going to operate this thing successfully. So I want to be real clear that we're not opposing being regulated by the city. Now, I will say that I appreciate Mr. Tadris's statement that maybe we ought to just let the churches do whatever they want to do, and Mr. Kaiser's comments somewhere similar to that. But again, we want to do what is responsible for this community. You know, we're asking for a warming shelter, regulations for a warming shelter. We're not talking about a homeless shelter. There's not going to be any meals with what we're talking about. There's not going to be any bathing facilities. All we're talking about is a place to let people come in and get out of the cold weather on the worst nights of the year. Now, the regulations say 32 degrees and from November 1st to April 30th. If I can assure you, we are not going to be open every night for that period of time. We haven't yet determined what our criteria is going to be for opening, but it's going to be more restrictive than 32 degrees. If we say 32 degrees, we're going to be open every night all winter, and we're not prepared for that, and I don't think the need is there for that. There's also, under the plan that we're looking at, there will be supervision. There will be at least 3, possibly 4 volunteers who will have been trained according to the guidelines that are set out in the proposed city regulations, and these volunteers will be awake all night. That's just part of the way it's going to have to work. So this is not going to be a slapstick operation. You know, in some ways, this could be even better than the warming centers that operate here during the day. You know, there's people go to the police department, or they go to the library and maybe some other places in town on days of bad weather. Well, all we're asking for is to set up a place where those same people can go at night when the conditions are such that they can't be outside, or it's life-threatening to be outside. That's all we're trying to do. We don't anticipate that all the people that come to this shelter are going to be the homeless population that we normally think of. You know, sometimes people's electricity gets cut off, the water gets cut off, and all of a sudden there's a cold weather hits, they got no place to go. This can provide for some of those kind of people. And this need, I think, has been magnified by the current COVID-19 situation. With the unemployment that has been as a result of that. And so all we're saying is that from a humanitarian standpoint, can we as a community not provide some kind of shelter for these people in our midst? Now, having said that, let's go back to the regulations that are being proposed. I've got 3 specific things within those regulations that I would like to see modified. The first is the regulations state that we're allowed to have a maximum of 15 people, including staff. I propose or request that that be increased to 20 plus staff, not 15 including staff, but 20 plus staff. And the reason I do say that is because we think that there might be times when there would be families that show up, and reaching that 15-person limit, if you have to take off 4 volunteers, that only leaves us space for 11 people. And so we think that it's reasonable to increase that. By going to the 20 limit, we can still meet the requirement in the regulations that says 1 toilet for each 10 beds. Any of the facilities that we're looking at would have a men's and a women's restroom, and so that's not an issue up to the 20 people. The second thing that I would like to see allowed for is some way that we can get more locations. As Tom's talked about, the only church in the downtown area, and we're looking at using churches because we've got a number of churches that have the kind of facilities that we can use where we can separate the people and so forth, and we can use those existing facilities without going to the expense of having to go out and acquire a building and remodel it and all those things. So at the moment, as Tom said, the only church that is in the downtown area that is permitted to be, that's within this zoning criteria, is First Baptist, or First Christian over here on Morley. And they have agreed to participate with this. So they are on board. But we also have 4 or 5 more churches sitting right around the perimeter of the downtown area that are just across the street from the correct zoning. And it would sure make life easier if some of those churches could be, if accommodation could be made for those churches. And the third thing that we would like to see is that the permit holder under the conditional use permit, instead of it being the church which is serving as the host, could that be the sponsoring organization so that it would be easier to move from church to church or from facility to facility without having to get multiple permits. So, you know, I'd be happy to answer any questions or.
Yeah, Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
you advocate having a different kind of criteria and regulations specifically for warmer shelters ran by the church rather than the general information that we put in here tonight. Would that solve part of your problems?
Depending on what those regulations how they would be different, that could help make things better, yes. The big thing is, we still have to meet some regulations. We still have to meet certain criteria.
I understand that.
And we don't have a problem with the city wanting to verify that we're going to meet certain criteria.
Well, I'm not so sure about the last request that you asked for regarding the permit.
The permit?
issue. I have a problem with that. I think if the church wants to host it, which is okay with me, in fact, I'd rather not have any regulations, let the church do their charitable things that they've been doing for years. But to have some outsider utilize those places, facilities, whether they are in the church or outside the church, I would advocate that the church that's requesting that the permit be issued in the church, for the church itself, to be used either in the church or any other facility that is owned by the church, rather than have one person doing that. I think we lose control of that situation. I prefer that to be the case.
The church, the hosting church, is always going to have the say of what days you're allowed to use it. We have a number of churches who have, if they don't feel they can provide facilities, they've already said, we think we can provide volunteers. So I'm not, I guess I'm not, all I'm asking for is that if the permit holder can be other than the specific church, then it becomes easier for the warming shelter to be held at First Christian on one night and First Baptist later in the week, and somewhere else yet later, still the same week or the next week. We've got a lot of people that are willing to volunteer and help. And all I'm asking is that I think that it would be easier for us if we could feel free to move among churches without having to have each church have a conditional use permit. I understand what you're saying, but I'm disagreeing with you, so.
Somebody has to take responsibility
Yes,
for having a license or a permit.
yes.
And we can't just have one person operating to different locations by different entities. I think that may be a little bit detrimental to the position of the city of Moberly, whether it's the Planning and Zoning Commission, whether the mayor or anybody else. And I think if we issue that type of permit, I think should be specific to a certain church. That does not impede practicing of the good job or the good intention of what the church is trying to do. I don't see that, but I don't see that as nothing but a plus if the church is sponsoring it. And then that way, if we expand it, you said the church can do it. It does not have to be in a specific area like downtown. It can do it at any place that the church property is controlled by the church. That's-
Well, I don't think that anything that we do will prevent the church from controlling its own property. If the church feels like they are losing control of the property, then the proper thing for the church to do is to say, we're not going to participate anymore. See, so I think the individual church would have a protection in that standpoint.
Well, the church may be, what about us? attorneys are going to sue everybody that is involved.
Well, there are provisions within the proposed regulations for insurance and that kind of thing, the requirements for that. So,
I don't anticipate anybody else stepping up to do the good work that the churches do with that. But I do see problems if the churches are not 100% in control of any facilities they operate that is under their control. If somebody else is operating with a building that's owned by one of us someplace or some outsiders, I think the responsibility of that might cause some problems for us on that. That's why I think, personally, I'd rather have the churches do it. Personally, from my feeling is that we shouldn't be regulating the churches, period. I'm serious. The churches have always done all these things on their own.
yes, yes.
But I also can see the problems that the city would have with some of the regulations.
Well, we're trying to do this as a group of organizations and a group of churches because no one group, no one church can do this by themselves. And so we anticipate that on any given day that this facility would be open, there would be maybe representatives from 2, maybe 3 different churches there as part of the volunteer staff. Maybe yet another church sends in the people that will do the cleanup when the night's over with, and clean up the place and do all that. That's the kind of situation that we envision and the cooperation that we're looking for among the different churches and the different groups.
Yes, Tom?
How many churches have formally committed to be participating in the program? I mean, like, voted on it amongst the churches and said we're going to do it? They passed.
The only church at this point that has firmly committed is First Christian, from the standpoint of saying they're willing to host. Now, we have other churches that have told us, we're behind you 100%, we'll help you with funding, we'll help you with volunteers, we will help make the project happen. But all of them are understanding that we have this limitation because of the zoning restriction at this point.
If we didn't have the zoning restriction, we would have other churches willing to be part of it.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's not stopping them from agreeing to it in concept.
No, no.
Trying to work under the direction that we've been given, so.
Well, and, the city, again, what I read to you a minute ago, is that our role as a city and the planning and zoning commission is of trying to balance landowners' rights with the budding landowners' rights.
Right.
So that's where it all falls back to. So otherwise, it'd be just like, do what you want to do. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. And again, you have your position on that, and there's others who have these positions over here, and we're trying to find something that's a good meet in the middle. I mean, you can't go all the way to one side or all the way to the other and survive.
From a geographical standpoint, we were trying to stay downtown.
She needs to come forward and speak in the microphone.
And identify herself. And Jerry would like to say something.
Well, first of all, these regulations are necessary, and as they're written, I think they're very necessary because they come from places that have done this. So we're not just talking about setting a standard for the churches in town. We can't discriminate later on if some other entity wants to have a temporary homeless shelter. So saying it's a warming shelter or whatever you want to say, that's just plain with me. It's a temporary homeless shelter. So you have the people that are usually in homeless shelter, and there has to be a high level of safety about it. So we're not just
Yes.
worried about the needs of these people, which is quite horrible that you want to do something with this. But we have to take care of the needs of the rest of the community and the people that live around all these. So that's why having insurance and having a place and having all those different codes is necessary, because then when you do more than one, you multiply that risk and you multiply
It was sent to, it was,
How could you have that document before this body even considered to have the rebuttal on it? How does that work?
I can't answer that question. I just know that I can show you the document that we were sent.
I was just curious.
This document,
You had more time to prepare this than the planning was
well, this document was sent by email to Paula back in late March, I think.
I'm just curious, because we tried to,
Sure,
and everybody sits on this, so they want to be treated fairly about how they make it.
sure.
So that's why I'm just curious.
Bob?
I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments.
Okay,
Number one, having some previous experience with the ordinances of the city, conditional use can only be put on property. That's the ordinance, so you can't put it on a group, it has to go on the property.
We can't hear you back here.
Okay, I'll get closer. I said the first thing is that, my understanding is a conditional use can only go on property. And as I'm reading through this, and this is just because in the last few days I've been working on insurance at the store, I would assume that every church's insurance would be just like my business insurance. If I want to insure someone or some facility or anything like another business, I have to create a certificate of insurance, but that has to be gone to a specific thing. I don't think you could grant, I don't think as a church, you could grant an organization that certificate for what this is. I think it will have to be property to property. That's just my opinion. I'm no
Okay.
insurance man. In listening, I agree 100% on the other churches around, because there's quite a few churches right in the downtown area. And I don't know how this could be done, Tom, and this is a question to you guys. Is there an ability to, say, put a circle or put so many feet within and so many feet close to an M1 zone or a B3 zone that we could say, if that church is within so many feet, it would fall into this? Is that a possibility? Well, I can see if there's other churches wanting to do that's a common sense thing.
Could be adjacent to, across the
Yeah, I
street
don't know.
from where we're not getting 3 streets over, but if this street is the cutoff and that church faces it, then.
It's just something, it's
that
something we
might
could look at. And the last thing, when you're talking about 15 people, including the staff, I guess in my mind, that's a little tight. I'm not sure that I would want to go to 20-plus staff, because you're jumping from 15 to 25 or 6 or 7, whatever the number would be. But I personally would not be uncomfortable with 20 people, including staff. So that would give them a little more leeway. If we can figure out a way for the other churches that are volunteering to be involved, to have the opportunity to use their facility, then that would make it much better, and I would think much easier to get things set up to operate. However, in my humble opinion, there's no choice on the conditional use of the property.
Okay.
Austin?
Question, on your chart here, the chart on page, say, 20 of 29, or more importantly, warming shelters is 23 of 29. It refers to a code of 46-144. You see that? So when I look at the 46-144 on page 29 of 29, my first question is, where does it show that warming shelters falls into all this other verbiage that starts on like 26 or 27? Instead, when I look at 46-144, I see size no more than 10 persons, including staff. So we have one page in the ordinance where it says 15, and this one says no more than 10. which one does the shelter, warming center, whatever, fall under?
If I could, Tom, I believe that section 46-145 is addressing the transitional living facility, the different category than what my understanding of what the warming shelter is.
Okay, so should 20, or this, yeah.
So when we write code, or when we propose code, we don't actually assign the numbers.
Okay.
Maybe I'll try this. When we recommend the code, we don't actually assign those numbers.
Okay.
We put them in there as a hypothetical. It could end up being 46-144. But the use standard identifier is when you look at page 29 of 29, where you see it says transitional living facilities.
Yep.
That goes to the table for transitional living facilities. That's why they match up to each other. When you look at temporary living shelter facility, which is what we were discussing here, that is 26 through 28. It's all in red, and that's because it says 46-XXX. We don't know if that's going to land at 144, because after this, we have several other recommendations that may bump those numbers backward even more.
Fair.
And so, unfortunately, the numbers they keep shifting. And so, we will keep them in a line when it goes to Municode, so that Municode gets it all right. But for the purposes of this, we look at the actual definition or the terms tied to it. So in this case, temporary living facility.
So on page 23 or 29, where it says 46-144, really should be 46-XXX
Yes,
until,
should
okay.
say just
Fair enough.
XXX.
I was just trying to figure out where the 15 versus 10, which one applied, so,
Yeah.
okay.
When we started this, it was all just this one, and then it progressed and we have 3 or 4 more.
Fair enough.
Yep.
I have one final thing that I would like to say, just real briefly. I have here approximately 120 letters that were solicited at various churches around over the community during the month of June. People that are supporting the project that we're promoting. So I've just, there's a number of people around town that are supporting us as well. With that, I thank you, and if there's no further questions, why, thank you for the time.
Are you presenting those things to the city to look at?
Sure.
I don't know what the intention of bringing it up if you're not going to give it to the city. Do we even want it?
Yeah.
Tom, do you want those?
When did we start?
6 months maybe.
So what's our next step?
Well, it doesn't have to be forced to tonight if you want to look at, the thing I was trying to say on this is just like we're doing right now. We have regulations in place. It doesn't mean they're set in stone, so I mean, if you want to put something in place or let them work on something right now, you can pass this proposed ordinance, or you can and then we can look at adding additional things, or if we want to, we could look at the other things that were requested here. Or you can make recommendations to the board that here's some things we like that we would like to see maybe added into this and studied. Staff could look at those things and bring back what we feel like would be the impact of those issues. We could look at again. So, I mean, we could do that. It doesn't have to be passed tonight, so.
I think changing the number is what's required. Number of residents and staff.
Carla, did you need to know the name of the lady who was making comments? Could you stand and give your name, please? Okay. Okay, what number?
I think the number was brought up to total 20, including staff versus 15 and only having 11.
Okay, well, his number was 20 plus staff.
No, 20
No,
total.
when it was-
Now it's 20.
16
That was Bob's
In the
number.
middle.
Yeah, yeah.
But you'd have to make that a motion to change that in this
Yeah.
if we want to do that right now, right?
I thought we just,
I think we ought to postpone it,
Bob,
defer action.
If you want to pass this tonight, I think 20 is the right number, including staff. But the thing that I'm uncomfortable with is what the distance would have to be to include the churches around the downtown area. I think those churches need to be included. So I know Tom has the ability to go on the map and draw a 100-foot circle and a 200-foot circle or whatever to do that. So I guess what I would lean toward is a motion to approve with changing it to 20, including staff, and then the appropriate length of space around the area downtown to include the churches.
okay, I'm going to be a devil's advocate here. What happens if you've got 17 people and 3 staff? And you've got somebody that comes in, just a single person comes and wants to come. So do you kick one of the staff members out so they can come in, so then you have 18 and 2 staff?
Depending on what the requirements were, the model of the plan. I mean, if you had, if it required 2 staff members there or 3 staff members there, that has to be in place.
So then you turn the person away. Okay, let me ask you this. Can there be, let's say you've got 3 churches that are involved. Does that mean that there could be then 20 people in each church?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as there were staff to take care of them.
Yeah, one question on the churches. I'm all for what you're saying. My question is, what if the church on Gratz Brown out by the high school wants to do it, Timberlake, or Zion Lutheran, or the one out, Family Life, whatever, out on 24? Are we limited to just the downtown churches, or?
Those are zone B, some of those are zone B3.
Already? Okay, I'm just
So, I
making
mean,
sure we're not
But-
excluding.
But the thing you have to think about is the churches that you're talking about, so are you saying all churches in the downtown, or are you saying ones that abut? What we have done in the past is, for example, a good example is you can have used to be, you could only have a private storage building if it was on your property where you reside. You couldn't have one, you couldn't buy an empty lot on the other side of town and build one. But we were having that request so often, so there was a guideline, so we had a thing set up where if it immediately abutted, if that lot abutted that district, they could do, a commercial district, then you could do that storage building on it. But we wouldn't let that happen on the next lot down or a block down or things like that. So when you say all the churches in downtown, I mean, I feel like that's kind of like open the door to any church. I mean, how are you going to turn any other church down or location? So would it be immediately abutting those districts?
Let me ask you a question of Ted. Ted, do you have other churches that would not be in the downtown area that you think will be interested in helping? So maybe we could just say the problem with making a general thing for a church is it's like everything else. That's a big category.
Could I offer a suggestion? If we could make it at this point such that the churches in the downtown area, I want to say within 2 blocks of the downtown, something like that. If that's what we could include at this point, we can always come back a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, after this thing is working good, and we have other churches that want to participate, and we can request a change to the regulation, can't we? So, that.
I think you're throwing it out here, though, when you say downtown, because it was specifically, B2 was not included. So if you say all of B2, you're kind of defeating the whole purpose of this. What we looked at was B3 and M1 zones. That was what was recommended. And so you're kind of really just going, well, let's throw that out and just do downtown only. So we're doing totally opposite of what was proposed.
Okay, maybe I misstated on the B2, B3, those.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I don't think there's people here, or I don't know if there is or not, but I mean, we've had as many calls as I've had for this. We've also had calls about we don't want these in the downtown. So, like, again, you have both sides of that, and I understand the desire for that, but that's why we've tried to come to some kind of agreement that would allow some of the churches to comply and be in that, but not be, fill in every church in the downtown district.
Okay, so what would you suggest?
I mean, just like he was saying, we could,
We've only got one church that would work.
I understand, in the downtown district or on the fringe of the downtown, correct. But do we have 60 people that need overnight shelter? I mean, I don't think we're talking about 20 people for an overnight.
So limit it to one per night. Why say, okay, you got 3 churches okayed? Well, I'm sorry, but you can only use one of them per night.
And I know what you're saying on that, but again, you're going to have every church in the B2 district. And so do we say, where do we limit that? I mean, is that fair to say, well, if I want a church out, if I want to be at Zion Lutheran out there on Route M, or I want to be out at the other ones around town, Timberlake or wherever. I mean, so how do you draw the line? I mean, if we don't have a zoning district or say immediately abuts that district, I mean, you're really kind of throwing the whole thing out on zoning. I mean,
Rich?
Go ahead.
I have a point of information. I'm a little confused. Are we talking about regulating real estate? Or are we talking about regulating a church organization? Because there's a Lions Club, there's a lot of different clubs and organizations that might want to participate in this.
Absolutely.
I'm not clear whether we're regulating real estate or a private
Real estate.
organization. So I'm not clear on, we've always talked about real estate. That's been our conversation. I mean, not real estate, but churches. But what are we doing here? Are we talking
Yeah,
about churches?
You're
or
accurate.
real estate?
That is that's a great example. Yes, we are talking about real estate. So when this regulation does not apply to zoning exclusively. So if you open that door, everything it abuts that. So that's why, good point. And so only thing we've been approached with are churches. So, I mean, that's why that's a topic of discussion, and you're right, we overlooked that in discussion. But that's what the regulations, that's a perfect example of why they were targeting that B3 and M1 districts. So that's all they said they proposed, but any facility, any building or facility in that district could be eligible for that. And I know that we've looked at, the city's tried to look at what buildings, that we might see out there as available that would be a good location for a homeless shelter to provide. And we've met with different organizations and talked about different strategies to try to provide that. So we're making a strong effort. Hope we don't take this as a denial, but we've tried to be somewhere, meet in the middle. And so, like he said, if we could try this, see if it works out for a period of time. It doesn't, it's still open for modification. It's not set in stone if we pass it.
Jerry?
I mean, I think we have to limit it to one place open at a time. I mean, more than 20 people. I mean, we're talking about what's going to happen, but nobody's talking about what happens at the first of the morning. Where are these people going to go? You can have 40 people walking around downtown. I had someone sit down in front of my office last week, in front of the street collection place. So, think of the burden you put on law enforcement if you're going to have 3 places open at one time, all night long. And we know what happened out on Logan Street. Now, so it isn't going to be as bad, but I'm okay if everybody's trained and registered, and proper insurance, and everything's done the way it should be to run a shelter. But we've spent a lot of money to make downtown nicer, and we've got things on the cusp of coming here to open hotels and things. Are we going to turn it into a downtown shelter also? I mean, that's what you're talking, 3 or 4 places with 20 each. I'd like to hear what the local business people downtown have to say about that. I don't think they're contemplating that. So, there's a lot of repercussions of this, and I think especially in moderation to begin with, these are regs that were in Columbia or some other towns that have done this. We need to have the regulation, and we can establish that relationship of working together with these people by them meeting that regulation, and then not go to multiple locations, but look at that one location. And that's what I would think.
I think that's the point. Wade into something instead of trying to go whole hog and reel it back in.
Ted?
I'm in agreement with limiting to one facility on any given night. The idea of 3 and 60 people, that sounds dreamy. We are not ready to handle that. I think that what we need at this point is one facility per night. And if we make this work and the need is there, which we don't know what the need is, if the need is there, we can always expand it in the future with the city's approval. We're fine with one per night.
Ron?
Madam Chairman, I make a motion that this ordinance pass with one modification, making the maximum of 15, including staff, change to 20, including staff.
Is there a second to his motion?
Second.
Any discussion, Jerry?
Here's my question, so is there a limit on what's gonna be open or not? 'Cause I don't think what's.
It'd be the same zoning, B3 and M1 would be the zoning, so it'd be, that's what we propose.
But is it saying only one can be open at a time? That's my question.
There's only one church right now that owns it.
There is no limit on our regulations, no.
So you need to amend that if we're gonna talk about one facility at a time.
He's limited it to the zoning. Right now, they're proposing using the church, and there's only one church that would fall into
In the downtown district, perimeter.
But any building could be used.
But
Potential is still there for multiples. I personally don't feel like I'm ready to vote on this tonight. I'd like to set this off until next month. I know there's a motion on the table and I can't do anything about that, but
Well, there seems to be a problem with the number of locations or the number of whatevers. So do you want to change your motion or add to it, or?
I'm open to a modification.
Go ahead. Paula, you come and state your, Tom, you need to give her.
Thank you. I want to reiterate that we don't have the volunteers to do 2 and 3 places a night. We're going to do good to operate one facility. What we're hoping for here is that this will give us some data to know how to move forward. You know, to establish and to run a permanent homeless shelter takes money. We don't have that. Data equals dollars. Anybody that's ever been involved in grant writing, you know that you have to have data before you can get any grant funding. So we have no funding stream right now for a permanent shelter. This would allow us to collect some data. I really, really hope that we're not needed at all. That would be my hope. We open a shelter, we say we're here, the doors are open, you need to come, and no one shows up. Yes. Then I can get on Moberly Talks and say, stop talking about this. We don't have a need. But this is a short, an inexpensive solution to a problem that we've all heard about on Moberly Talks for 3 years, 5 years. What about the homeless people? It's cold outside tonight. Well, let's find out if we have a problem. This will be a kind of a transition way to decide if we do have a problem that needs to be addressed. But if we have to go through all of that regulation, we're not going to do it for 5 churches. So I just want to make that part clear.
Bob?
Make an addition to my motion that there be a maximum of 1 facility open per day.
Do I have a second to the amendment?
Second that.
Okay, Bob, would you like to read your motion in entirety now that it's been amended?
I didn't write it, so. What I tried to do is get away from.
I've got it.
Okay,
So-
Tom.
So he's asking to modify the ordinance that's on the table to allow 20 people total, which would include the staff, and also not more than 1 facility approved for opening at a time,
Within
for night. Yeah.
within the,
Proposed zoning districts,
Okay.
B3 or M1. Yes, yeah. So all you'd have to do is add those 2 things to make it fly. So 20 people instead of 15, plus, and then the 1 facility open per night.
Did you get that, Carla? Okay. Okay, so, that, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see. Number 4. A notice of a public hearing for a request submitted by the City of Moberly for a text amendment to define the types of residential units in commercial districts and to clarify zoning regulations applicable to those definitions in commercial districts. Tom?
Yep, I'm gonna go through it here. So again, Aaron has put together a nice little cliff notes up here. To be very basic here, right now, our downtown district has some mix of, we have apartments downtown on the second floor. We have a couple of locations where we have residential on the ground floor as on the back side of it. What this would do is make a more, make those relevant. I mean, where you can have those as a conditional use. So basically what we're trying to do is allow apartments to be more common on the ground level as long as they're not taking up the storefront. The storefront would still have to remain a retail, but the back portion of it, up to 50%, could be residential on the ground floor. So above ground, below ground could be residential, but not the front. So basically you're keeping the front storefronts retail and making those buildings more viable for the type of improvements and development that we're seeing nowadays.
But the upstairs could be front.
Yeah, pardon?
The upstairs could be on the front.
Residential is on the front windows of the upstairs, yes. Your ground level storefronts will still be retail or business use. So that's the very brief gist on this. I didn't know if you wanted to go into very details on this one. But it still would be. Yes, the whole building can be retail, so, or commercial, that's standard. Just in the past, the old buildings, were originally designed to have, a lot of times people store owner would live upstairs and have a business downstairs, or maybe a doctor's office and then an apartment in the back. So we're seeing, if you want to see the buildings develop, it needs to have a higher percentage of residential. That's what the desire is. But we also need to comply and make sure it stays a commercial district and keep that commercial storefront.
It does say in here where if you're going to be on ground floor, that residential cannot be accessed from the commercial part or the retail part.
So what
right?
you would do
It's
is
to
like.
only be from the back.
No, they could, if you look at downtown apartments, they have the storefront, you have the big storefront, and then you have a little door here that goes upstairs.
Uh-huh.
So we're saying your primary use, we would recommend and try to get the access to be from the rear, but in certain situations, you could have a secondary entrance off the front where just a slot for a door to go to a back apartment or something like that, if that was your only access. But you can't access, so like you wouldn't come through the front door of the drugstore to go to your apartment in the back.
Right, that's what I want.
Yeah.
It says that's clarified in here, right?
Yes.
From the retail, not from the storefront, but
Yeah,
from the retail part, that's totally separate from
The residential has to be accessed exclusively by itself, but minimized, do a single door on the front. Any questions?
Any questions, comments from anybody, audience up here, anyone?
Madam Chair, I make a motion, we pass agenda item number 4.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Number 5, a notice of a public hearing for a request submitted by the City of Moberly for a text amendment to define and regulate mobile food trucks in B2, B3, and M1 districts.
So to clarify on that is mobile food trucks and trailers, any type of portable food dispensary, whether it be a trailer, van, pickup, whatever. So our codes were adopted in 12, and I think 2014 is when regulations came out on guidelines on food trucks. So our ordinances did not include anything on that. They're very vague, minimal. So to try to deal with that as we see more food trailers and food vans and stuff at different locations, we've, again, worked with other consultants and outside organizations, other communities, and put together these codes. And so, just to be brief, limited to, the Cliff Notes, limited to permitted uses in a B1, B2, B3, and M1 district, located on a hard surface or in an improved distance from existing restaurants, self-contained power source and operating requirements, cleanliness of surrounding property, vehicle licensure, limited to overnight parking. And this was kind of one, as staff, we were very flexible with. Limited overnight parking, 2 nights and 48 hours. So what that means is the vehicle could remain on site overnight for 2 nights. The next one is limited operation at a single site 14 consecutive days, which means they would have to take it off and come back every night. You know, if they wanted to be there, they could operate for 14 consecutive days, maximum 60 days in a year at one location. So you wouldn't have like somebody there every day, all year long.
The Kentucky Fried Chicken former
Yeah.
building with the sushi?
That would fall under these guidelines.
Okay.
What about the food trucks that are currently always out at Orchard?
Orscheln's, that's where they would have to, they could be there, and that's why I said that one option, limited overnight parking 2 nights. That's, we know we have some that are there for sometimes a week at a time. I don't think there's a huge issue with it being, when I say the next one down, 14 consecutive days, meaning that they could be there on site for up to 2 weeks. I don't think that, you know, if they're at an approved location and meet all the other guidelines, I don't see that as a big no-no. But that was one of the guidelines we saw in other regulations, and we were mentioned by that was something we ought to consider, is not to let them stay overnight for a lot of nights. But I think that 14 consecutive days and a maximum of 60 days at one location a year is adequate to deal with our issues.
So if I'm a food vendor, and I'm not, but if I was, and I went out to Orscheln's every day and parked, did my business, and then left at 6 o'clock that evening or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, drove home, parked, and stayed the night, came back the next day, does that mean I can only operate 14 days out of 60 at that location?
14 consecutive days, not more than 60 per year at that location. But you could do multiple locations.
Because, I mean, that's kind of become the food truck place.
It has.
out there. Has there been complaints about that being there
We've had issues with different things like that, yes.
at the Orchard?
Not specifically there, but I mean, we've had issues where trying to regulate food trucks and food vehicles and food trailers, and we have had no regulations in place. So what we're trying to do is adopt regulations. It's not targeted for that location or any specific location. It's just putting in some guidelines that we can effectively regulate food trucks and trailers in general.
And to be clear, I support it. I'm just questioning, I don't want to affect people that have been doing this for a while successfully, but I also understand we have concern about, you know, if you have a truck that sits there 24/7 for X amount of time.
You just don't want to have a place come in and be that, if you're going to have a restaurant, have a restaurant. What we're saying is, there's rarely, if I've ever seen anybody be at Orscheln's for more than 2 weeks consecutively. I mean, normally it's like a weekend or a week, and most food trucks are like that. And
I'm questioning the 60 out of 60 days.
no,
60
that's
days
60 days out of 365, so.
Yeah, that's the part I'm questioning. That's the only part I'm questioning.
Tom, would this be applicable for community celebrations, the 4-H
Like-
fair, or the railroad days, or any of that? Would this be applicable to those people?
They're approved by council or other events, and they're also on private property, so in most cases, either on the park or approved by council for an event like that. So they would not be, they'd have to meet all the requirements, as far as, guidelines, but I mean, as far as timing and stuff like that. And that's why I was saying, really, if you eliminated the limited overnight parking 2 nights and 48 hours, none of that would affect those even, they would all fly past that anyhow.
So if a carnival came in for a week and had their food vendors, which of course is a mobile vehicle.
Right.
That would be excluded from the application of this rule.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir.
Can you go back and explain that Japanese place by Kentucky Fried Chicken? How long can they stay there?
Hoshi? It'd be a food truck. They would be able, like, for example, if this passed and if you did, depending on the last two items there, the limited overnight parking, they would be eligible to stay there 2 nights out of 48 hours. So, or 2 nights, 48 hours, and so consecutive days. I think that's probably a little heavy, a little strict, you know. So the last item is limited operation to a single site, 14 consecutive days. So that would allow them to remain there. They could be there for 2 weeks, drive off site, come back the next day, and stay for another 14 days. They could do that up to 60 days out of the year. But they could only be at that location for a maximum of 60 days in a year.
I think they've already been there for longer.
Well, we
than
have
that.
no regulations on it at this time.
So they can start anew from whenever we adopt this by the city council.
Pardon?
For 60 days,
They could be there 14 consecutive days if this was passed as is. Well, if, depending on what you do on those last two items, the bottom line says 14 consecutive days, not more than 60 in a year.
Okay, it says also here that they must have a city license. What about also paying city sales tax?
Well, they're under that business license. It falls under that category, and Greg's the business license and how sales tax applies, but yeah, that'd be applicable.
Okay. Also, when you have out at Orsolans, people selling their popcorn, roadside produce and all that, will that fall under this?
No, they have, those are, if they're not a food vendor, if they're selling like, as far as if they're selling like a farmer's market type thing, they have, but there's a marketing, there's a peddler's license, yeah. I couldn't think of the word. They have a peddler's license.
What about the guys that sell the popcorn year-round?
It's a different category. It's not considered like a hot service food truck or van or trailer.
I make a motion, we pass.
Can you clarify, do you want the limited overnight parking 2 nights and 48 hours or not?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm fine with that, so.
I'm just concerned with 60 days too limiting for certain food truck, for food.
Well, the thing about it is they could park it across the street for the other 60 days, and so, I mean, it's not like they just can't be, they could be in the Lowe's parking lot or the R&P Lumber parking lot. I mean, it's just they couldn't be in that corner. And honestly, if you think about it, they're usually there on the weekends. So if you think the weekends, that's 60 days, they're not there in the wintertime. So the 60 days more than covers about any of them you'll see out there. I don't believe you've ever seen.
Who's going to regulate this?
Unfortunately, probably code enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just wondered, you know, with 60 days and moving for one day and then moving back.
It's going to be one of those things where it'll be like,
Sounds like a
you know, we're not going to be out there with a notepad marking down the
Yeah.
days, so it's going to be one of those things where. Yeah, it's kind of, it's like anything. You have a guideline to effectively deal with it if it becomes an issue.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Do we wish to vote now? Any other discussion? We have to wait for him to come back. Excuse me?
Sam made seconded.
Okay. I just wondered if we needed to wait for him, but people are saying we have a quorum, so we don't need to wait for him. So we're going to vote. Okay? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Number 6, notice of a public hearing for a request submitted by the City of Moberly for a text amendment to define and clarify medical marijuana dispensaries for regulating odor control.
Okay, so first of all, let me say that this is the zoning portion of these regulations. There are also some guidelines, regulations which don't apply to this. So, for example, if smoke or vape or odor was leaving your premise, going on the neighbor's premise and causing an impact, that would fall under the nuisance guidelines. So That's why, I just wanted to clarify, though, this is the zoning regulations as far as this. So this is more like for commercial facilities or home licensed grow facility, any kind of grow facility. So, that being said, on-site use of a cannabis product or medical marijuana, I guess, or on-site is prohibited, which these are kind of restating some state regulations. Display of licenses are required. Ventilation in all facilities, and this is one that probably is going to be like somewhat of an issue. Most of your commercial type facilities are going to have that with the odor control. And this would also apply to home grow facilities. And it wouldn't be some of those things that we would be, as the staff, enforcing. But if it became an issue with the neighbors or something like that, and they didn't have it in place, that would be something that we could fall back on again and have them put in place. But we're not going to go out and inspect residential grow facilities. Site plan review required for all non-residential cannabis facilities. So, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it.
Questions? Audience? Anybody have any questions, comments? Oh, wait. Bob made it, but who made it first?
Just pick Don.
Rich did? Don did? Don.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, any other comments? Okay, let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Okay, other business? I know, but he may have found something.
No, I don't, you all shoot me if I say anything else, so I'm done.
Okay, is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Okay, I think all those in favor?